Thank you. Thank you. Really pleasure. That's a word, right? Pleasure to be here. Um, so my title, right? Reimagining clinical research, transformation of trial design and conduct. That's a really long-winded way of saying this is a conversation about how we might be able to shift our perspective and make today uh, the springboard into reimagining the way that we view ourselves and our roles in the clinical research industry. Now, my goal is to really be able to get you some valuable information in a usable format with enough humor to keep you interested, but not so much that makes you think I don't take it seriously, because I certainly do. Uh, now, the uh, the real challenge here is in navigating a space of a really highly technical, complex, and global industry, all in real time. It seems like everything's shifting, changing in real time, very fluid and dynamic. And you're going to see that thread kind of woven throughout the course of the presentation today. My name, of course, is David Burrow, and we are in the Office of Scientific Investigations. That's the office that investigates scientifically. What that really means is that we're responsible for clinical trial assessment, compliance, enforcement, but that's also regulations, guidance, legislative development, and things like that. All of the different blends of herbs and spices that go into being a regulator, that all comes down to OSI and the clinical research conversation. And it's a really, really interesting space to be. Side note, if you're ever going to receive a warning letter in clinical research, it's because I signed it, which is terrifying, both for you and for me. But it is a great space to be able to have this conversation, because it means that we have a real life discussion about what really matters in clinical research. Things that are not just administrative in nature, but what the real meat and potatoes are, why it matters in terms of protecting human research subjects and in driving quality in the data that we review as part of an application. So disclosures, I am a government employee, so I have nothing to disclose. Yay. Overview. Now, this is a pretty ambitious agenda for just 40 minutes. Not really sure how long it's going to take here. The central theme is, of course, on innovation, and that applies just as much to me as it does to everybody else. This is a little bit new talk for me, so I haven't run it before, don't really know how long it's going to take. And I'll share a secret with you. And the secret is that last topic, the lightning round, debunking FDA myths. See, the reason I included that was because I can kind of expand or contract that section to be able to fit the time that we have available to us here. And I know that a good magician doesn't reveal his tricks, but I'm not a magician, so I'll reveal my tricks freely here. But you'll see the overarching themes of evolving, dynamic research and the nature that we see in the global ecosystem here come up more and more as we get through these topics. The reason for that is because this is complicated. It's not just in clinical research generally, not just in innovation in a highly regulated space, but also in the ability to be able to get you some really easily consumable information in just 40 minutes. It's a real challenge here. And I'm going to do my very best to keep it interesting. One of the key points that I wanted to make sure that I could raise is that clinical research isn't just about the design and conduct and assessment of studies. There's a big component of that that's about you. It's the clinical research workforce and how we show up in our day-to-day lives across the spectrum of trial sites, trial designs, and all of that. And what you'll see in this picture here is that at every stage where a human is involved, we have the opportunity to muck it up. And that word, again, was muck with an M. It's the human element in clinical research that I think has the real room for us to take that next leap, that next great step in our evolution as a workforce and as an industry. Now, in the evolving clinical trial ecosystem, the reason I like to call it an ecosystem that evolves is because it really is one. That we have different study designs, different study execution strategies, operational approaches, and different data sources. We have different strategies for clinical trial assessment, including inspections and other things. But the reason this is an ecosystem is because it's so fluid and dynamic over the course of time. If you look back in the way that the industry was run, even just like 10 years ago, you have entities that were in place 10 years ago that are no longer with us. You have roles from 10 years ago that are no longer with us. You have roles today that weren't even envisioned back then. And just like evolution in an ecosystem, there are roles, people, skills, technologies, tools that die out. They are deemed unfit for survival. And clinical research is very same. It's a living, breathing, fluid, dynamic industry that evolves over time. And we as a clinical research workforce need to be really mindful of that and the fact that what was true yesterday might not be true tomorrow. Now, even when those entities, the roles, the vendors, the CROs, even when that changes over the course of time, we know that reimagining clinical research isn't about changing clinical research. Clinical research is going to change on its own. This ecosystem is going to continue to evolve. What we're really talking about is that reimagining clinical research is about changing how we think about clinical research and our role within this dynamic ecosystem. You always hear the term baby steps. People like to use the baby step idea because it's like small, tentative steps that you can continue to take over the course of time. But if you've ever seen a baby walk, they don't take small, tentative steps. They have these really unbalanced but super enthusiastic steps forward. They lurch forward. And when we're talking about the baby steps that we get to take in clinical research to make tomorrow a better day, what we're really talking about is those lurches forward that we can take really enthusiastically together as an industry. Baby steps is absolutely the right term, but it's in a different context than you usually use it for. Now, one of the most critical parts in this conversation is about aligning on terminology. And it's an area that we in FDA and across industry tend to mess up all the time. We don't use the right terminology, we don't use it in the right context, and over the course of time in these types of conversations, some of these words that we continue to use cease to carry any meaning because we have overused them. What I've included here are just a couple different examples of things like operational approaches. You might look at decentralized clinical trials as being an operational approach. You could look at data sources like real world evidence, real world data. You could look at EHRs and things like that. And you could look at different types of trial designs like master protocols. Now, the reason that these conversations are so critical is because they aren't just one thing or the other. It's not right or wrong, yes or no, good or bad. All of this exists on a continuum. So you don't just have a decentralized clinical trial. You have a trial that has decentralized elements in it. You don't just have a pragmatic trial, you have a trial that has pragmatic elements in it. All of these exist on a continuum. And they can show up in very different ways depending on where you are in this ecosystem and the extent of control that you have over what's going on in your day-to-day operations. So even as designs for trials change, even as the operational approaches that are deployed here change, and even as the data sources that we use continue to change, there is a constant. The constant is us. It's the clinical research workforce, which gets us to the idea of how the evolution, the transformation of clinical trial design and conduct, it's not about clinical research as an like vague amorphous entity. It's about us and re-envisioning the way that we engage in this industry. Make your peace with the fact that clinical research is going to change on its own. It is a really dynamic and fluid industry. And our role is to shift the way that we think about innovation in clinical research to appreciate those leverage points, those key points where we have the opportunity to intervene to make tomorrow a better day, to ask ourselves, how do we make this 10% better? That's the crux of the conversation here. We are the constant in this fluid, dynamic ecosystem of clinical research. Now, when we get into the conversation about innovation, it's a great buzzword, but it's a buzzword that for me is kind of a pet peeve because we have overused the idea of innovation. Because as I noted just a second ago, clinical research is innovation. It's innovation in novel treatments. It's innovation in clinical practice. Clinical research is innovation. So when you talk about how we innovate clinical research, you're talking about how do we innovate innovation. It gets to be a really complicated conversation. And, we know that innovation does not mean new. You can have incredible innovations in clinical research that are not things that are brand new. They're just upscaled, reused in a different context. And in that new context, it is an innovation. But the key there is that innovation doesn't mean you have to do something brand new in industry, and things that are new are not necessarily better. Just because it's new doesn't necessarily mean that that's an innovation that's going to drive improvements in clinical research over time. What matters is why. Why are you choosing to change something? And you can think about that in a couple different ways, right? The choice to make a change. It could be because your boss told you to change something. It could be because innovation is a buzzword. Or it could be because you have recognized that you have a gap in your operational processes and there's a chance to make things just 10% better. That why, choosing to do something with intent, with knowledge, because it is something that you believe is going to show improvements in your operations over time, that is the crux of innovation. Not just because it's new, because new isn't always better. And when I when I start to think about things like this, I'm going to have to ask for your patience because I have a metaphor that I tend to use, and that's about cheese. So I apologize to all of you lactose intolerant members of our audience, but well-aged cheese is a fantastic delicacy. Well-aged cheese is rare. It's of the highest quality. It is really, really valuable, and it's delicious. But that block of cheddar that you have sitting in the back of your refrigerator for 5 years is not the same as well-aged cheese, right? Well-aged cheese is not necessarily old cheese. The same thing comes up in the conversation of experience versus expertise. When you talk about the clinical research workforce, we've heard this standard that you have to have 2 years of experience to be able to qualify for even the most basic entry-level positions. But I would encourage us to think about the distinctions between experience and expertise. That old cheese isn't necessarily good cheese. I would encourage us to think about the qualities that we look for in our dairy products and the qualities that we look for in our clinical research professionals that are going to help us to take the clinical research enterprise to the next level. The skill sets of yesterday are not the skill sets of tomorrow. We need to be able to evolve our workforce, evolve our skill sets in order to be able to meet the needs of tomorrow. So we know quality by design, it's a very well socialized idea. I think quality by design has probably been around for more than 15 years now, but it is all too often misunderstood. And we know that every person who competes in a race has the same goal. The goal is to win the race, but the goal is not what matters. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems and preparation. And that is the very nature of quality by design. I really just don't think there's just a better way to explain quality by design. It's the decisions that you can take to be able to drive the systems and the preparation to make sure that the errors that occur in a trial are errors that don't matter to the critical endpoints that you're looking at, to the safety and efficacy data for the trials. It's about systems and preparation. Now, QBD, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the idea, is simply that you're looking for the absence of errors that matter. The issue there is that we know that perfection is unattainable, that errors are going to happen in clinical research. Even the very best study design, the best structured operational approaches, even the very best sites are going to have things that just don't go quite right. Quality by design is the systems and preparation that goes into designing a study where you expect to minimize the presence of the errors that truly do matter. Now, again, that's a frame of mind. It's a shift in the way that we view this. We're looking at speed bumps. Speed bumps are acceptable. Errors are going to happen. What you're trying to do is to avoid the roadblocks, the things that represent significant challenges in our ability to have reliable data of safety and efficacy as an outcome for these trials. You know, there's a great boxer back in the day, Mike Tyson. You might have heard of him. He was famous because he could knock out an opponent, a professional boxer, in just seconds. And, you know, it was one of those things where at that point in time, when he was getting ready for a match with a new opponent, his opponents would say, I've studied the film. I know how to beat him. They'd have all of their strategies in place. And Mike's response was, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's true. That is clinical research. Everyone has a plan until things start to go sideways. Quality by design is about understanding the ways that things can go wrong and understanding how to mitigate the potential catastrophic impacts of them when they do go wrong. It's about being able to get hit, but not knocked out. That is quality by design. It's the absence of errors that matter in clinical research. Now, this is gritty, it's challenging work, it's not easy, and it's in the execution that I think the challenge lays. That's where we come into play as the clinical research workforce. The one constant in this industry, we, the clinical research workforce, have the opportunity to bring about that true and lasting change. Now, the best thing I can say here is that you're not alone. Quality by Design has a wealth of information out there in the public domain. What I'm showing you here is the CDER, that's the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative webpage. They have toolkits, resources, information of all kinds, different frameworks and models that you can pull down from the web and use to your benefit. And this is all out there. And this is really scary stuff, for sure. When you're talking about changing the way that you operate in an individual study, for a site, for a company, when you're talking about changes in the way that you operate, you're talking about a great leap into the unknown. And that takes courage. It takes courage to be able to innovate. It takes courage to be able to actively choose to do something different when you don't really know what the outcome is. And that word courage can be defined as knowing something that might hurt, but doing it anyway. But stupidity has the very same definition, knowing that something might hurt, but doing it anyway. And that's why life is hard. But what matters is why you choose to do that. Just like we were talking about before, in Quality by Design, it's about knowing why you're making that change. Is it because you believe that making this change can improve your outcomes by 10%? Or are you making this change because you were told you had to do it, because it's the new and shiny thing, or something like that? The why is really what matters in Quality by Design. So please understand that point, that change for the sake of change serves no purpose. That the key in Quality by Design, the key in innovation is identifying why you're doing what you're doing, not just change for the sake of change. Now, in Quality by Design, if you were looking for a single place to start, I would highly recommend the Principles document. Principles document, absolutely essential resource for you. And I love the idea, or I guess the quote, that a goal without a plan is just a fantasy. Quality by Design and these documents, these resources, give you the information you need in order to be able to take that goal and take it from a fantasy, make it into a reality. It gives you actionable steps that you can put into place in real time at your site, at your company, at your institution, to be able to make things just a little bit better. Two things I really wanted to point out here. First is that it's not a checklist. It's not a checklist idea. When you get back to the slides I shared just a minute ago, you see that virtually infinite variability in the way that trial designs, operational approaches, and data sources can come up, different variability in the way that you see clinical research sites positioned to be able to meet the needs of individual trials, given their unique systems and endpoints and the tests that you might need to do in support of that clinical trial. virtually infinite variability. And that means that a checklist mentality doesn't work. You have to be able to think through what the specific risks of your trial might be and how you might best position yourself and your sites to be able to meet that need. And the last question, or the last point here, can't overemphasize or underemphasize. Can't say it enough. The emphasis in engaging all stakeholders early on in your trial design conversations, absolutely critical. Because nobody can write a symphony alone. We know that this is something that really takes a conversation. There are a lot of different parties in place here, and we need to be able to make sure that your quality by design, your risk assessments, talk not just with your sponsors, your CROs, your vendors, but also with your different sites, because each of those different sites is going to deploy an individual protocol with a different infrastructure. And you need to know how that's going to play out across the different sites that you're working with. One of the big parts here, that people, it's the human factors that I have at the very bottom of the screen here. And dealing with the human factors is something that I think we all too often just gloss over. The personnel, because you can't underestimate the impact that one individual at your institution can have on the outcome of a trial, on the experience of the patients, on the experience of your other study team members. The human factors that are involved here are really critical. And when you're talking about a poor performing employee or somebody that has having a negative impact on your trial as a whole, you're talking about the really hard, the gritty, the sand in your bathing suit type of work that we need to be able to do to be able to improve the outcomes that we're looking for. That's necessary as part of the growth for the industry. But even as necessary as it is, we just simply cannot allow a wishbone to grow where a backbone should. Even though it's hard, this is the hard work that's necessary for us to be able to really change the dynamic of how we engage in this ecosystem. And if you're looking for a visual representation of quality by design, you need look no further than this. You got to remember that idea that we can do anything, but we can't do everything. That applies in quality by design, in the structure of clinical research, generally. We can do anything, but we can't do everything. You have to be able to identify what really matters in the context of your clinical trial for the unique needs of that site, that patient population, that endpoint, or what have you. Now, CDER has an incredible portfolio of programs in operation right now. These are all legacy programs. They are out there available to anyone, and they are all directed at advancing clinical research in CDER. These are opportunities for sponsors and applicants to engage with the agency to increase the chance of success, decreasing the chance that errors are going to happen on the back end. I would highly recommend anyone who has the opportunity to engage with the agency on any of these programs to do so. They are well worth the time and effort. You see a lot of common themes here too. Decentralized clinical trials, real-world evidence, rare diseases. These are all opportunities where CDER, where FDA has dedicated resources to be able to ensure that we can further support innovation in these very targeted areas. Absolutely worth the time if you have the opportunity. But if you can't, if you aren't in a position to be able to make use of those programs, if you're looking for additional resources, FDA has a wealth of guidances out there. They come out just about every week. Real world evidence, DCTs, RIEs, RRAs, you have the acronym alphabet soup out there all the time. And some of you might find these resources to be incredibly helpful. Others might find these guidances to be about as helpful as the letter G in the word lasagna. And there are always more guidances. They continue to come out. And one of the challenges for us in the agency is being able to get current thinking out in a way that makes it really timely. We navigate good guidance practices, the Administrative Procedures Act, notice and comment rulemaking, and that means that we can't just get guidance out there at the drop of a hat. It's something that we have to do with clear deliberation and intent to make sure that what we put out there in the public domain is true and accurate reflection that allows us to continue this growth innovation journey in the industry generally. Make no mistake, the F in FDA stands for flexibility here. Now, after talking about the existing CDER innovation programs and all of the guidances out there, all of us are probably going to have one of three looks on our faces. You're either going to look like this, where loosely translated, it could be like, huh, what does this mean for me? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Or you could look something like this, where it's just like, how do I do this? What am I supposed to do? Where is the chase and how do we cut to it? Or you could have this kind of look on your face, in which case it might be time for happy hour or some other solution for the stress and anxiety of the day. But be that as it may, have no fear, because the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research has come up with the new CDER Center for Clinical Trial Innovation. I always stumble over that, C3TI for short. Now, there are an incredible wealth of resources on the C3TI website. This was just released in mid-April, April 15th. So if you haven't already digested all the information on CDER's webpage about C3TI, I highly recommend you do so. That will connect you to those innovation programs that I shared a few slides ago. It'll also get you that direct line of communication. It's like a concierge service for innovation in CDER. And our objectives here are really in making sure that we can facilitate the sharing of lessons learned so that those lessons learned from innovations in the past can be captured appropriately and shared to industry so that we can continue to build that tidal volume of awareness. We also want to be able to communicate and collaborate with external stakeholders. That's you. Hi. This is an opportunity for us to have conversations about what might be done in clinical research to make things 10% better, to identify the big problems and put solutions together that are going to help to mitigate those challenges, to take us one step forward. Baby steps, unsteady, excited lurches forward together. And lastly, we have the demonstration programs. That's just a fancy word for pilots. I'm putting together several pilots that are dedicated at looking at very specific aspects of clinical trial innovation to see how we might be able to work together to be able to take that one step forward. So please, if you haven't already done so, take a look at the FDA webpage for C3TI and all of the resources that are available to help advance innovation in clinical research for drugs. Now that takes us to the regulation of clinical research. My personal thoughts on how this plays out. See, balance is absolutely essential because we need to be able to balance the level of specificity that we have in our regs and our guidance with the need for flexibility, understanding that this is a global industry, that we are not the only regulators who are engaged in these conversations. We are one of many, and we don't always get to hold the pen. Surprise, surprise. We have to be able to maintain that balance, the operational agility to be able to ensure that what we put out in the public domain as regulators is something that provides value as the baseline for expectations for clinical trial design, conduct, and reporting. But we aren't providing the ideal state because we need to be able to have that operational agility. We have to understand the vast differences in sophistication across trial sites and being able to ensure that all of those sites have what they need in order to be able to succeed. So we have to be able to have that balance, the agility, providing a baseline standard that's flexible in this global environment where we are not the only regulators who have a stake in the conversation. And what that really brings us back down to is this idea that we need to focus on our critical interests just like you do in quality by design. We have to focus on the interests of reliable clinical trial data supporting safety and efficacy, fit for purpose ideas across the ecosystem. And those critical interests serve as our North Star, regardless of if we're talking about a new policy, a new guidance, or new regs. Focusing on those critical interests in the clinical research industry and ecosystem as they exist today, and preparing for what they might look like downstream. And that means that we have to be aware of this time-space continuum. And I use that because the drug development industry isn't something that happens overnight. If you start the development of a clinical trial design right now, you're operating with 2024 information, 2024 guidance, feedback, expectations. But even if you start that trial now, once you get it set up, and stood up all of the clinical trial sites. Once you run that trial, it might be a trial that takes a year to complete. Then you compile all of the data and you work up the NDA and submit that to the agency. It could be 5 years or more downstream. So what is true today when you start that risk assessment might not be true 5 years from now or more when you submit that application. So we as regulators need to be able to understand the time-space continuum and ask ourselves if those choices were reasonable at the time that you had to make them, not necessarily when that application comes into the agency, because we cannot sacrifice the statistical and scientific rigor of the application review process. We need to know that these drugs are products that work and are safe for their intended purposes. Now, the role of perspective here is a really interesting one because it is a fluid and dynamic environment. There are subtle shifts in the phrases that we use, like I love explanation versus an excuse. When you're talking about the conversations with the agency, provide explanations for what you did, not excuses. Provide responses to the inquiries that we have, not reactions. Make it deliberate. Fully considering all the potential impacts of what you're saying, what you're doing, and how that might play out. And understand, of course, that role of people on people. We talked about that before, the human factors that are involved in clinical research and the critical role that the clinical research workforce plays in driving quality at the macro level. Because we know that perfection is unattainable, that we aren't going to have perfectly designed and perfectly run clinical trials across many, many different clinical sites. That's just not the way that it works. We're trying to minimize the chance that errors that matter, in fact, come into play. Now, lightning round debunking FDA myths. I included this because I can expand or contract it, right? And I'll go through this pretty quick because I am a little longer than I thought it would. So normalizing the inspection process, who knows what and when? This is a question that we get all the time. And the way that that shows up is in people thinking that sponsors and applicants know which clinical sites are going to be inspected for the review of an application. It's not true. Sponsors don't know where we are going to inspect when we are doing the inspections to review a pre-market application. We select sites for inspection based on the use of a clinical investigator site selection tool, CIST for short. It takes into account 26 different factors at the application level, the site level, and the study level, and gives us a risk score. But we don't just go to the sites number 1, 2, and 3 on the risk score. It's a tool and not a rule. And we can determine which sites we want to inspect based on whatever the risk profile is for that product, what we know about the portfolio of sites that are contributing data for that application. So a sponsor doesn't know where we're going to go, but they could suspect it because the sponsor knows their enrollment numbers. They know who the highest enrolling sites are. They know which sites might be driving the efficacy assessments. So they could suspect that we might inspect individual sites, but they're not going to know. That's not information that sponsors have. What does it mean to pass an inspection? Well, this question requires context because for a clinical site, passing an inspection could just mean not getting a 483. But that isn't passing an inspection in every context, because for a sponsor who's really dedicated and interested in knowing that the application that they submit to the agency is going to get approval, we could have findings from inspections that don't have 483s that contribute significant information in the review of the application. So even though the CI doesn't get a 483, that very same inspection could result in throwing out data from a site or series of sites. It could result in getting an information request or running a sensitivity analysis or something like that. Just because you don't get a 43 doesn't necessarily mean that you pass, in air quotes, an inspection from every stakeholder's perspective. So what does it mean to get a 43? That is inspection observations. Our ORA colleagues are at your site for just a week or maybe a little more. They don't have access to a ton of information. They just have access to what they can get while they're there. A 43 is the inspection observations. The bioresearch monitoring program is set up so that all of those decisions about the final classification, what is a true violation of significance, all of those come back to the center. The center makes all of those decisions. So a 43 is really just your opportunity to know what you need to respond to the agency about. A 43 could be viewed as a good thing because it gives you the opportunity to frame the issues in the light most favorable to you in your response to the 483. If you didn't get a 483, if those same options or items were just discussion items in an EIR, you wouldn't have the opportunity, or you wouldn't know that you had the option there to just respond to the agency and help to frame those issues in the light that is absolutely most favorable to you. 43, strictly inspection observations, not a reflection of the final agency decision or compliance outcome at all. How do inspections inform the review of an application? Well, I kind of covered this one already, but an inspection could result in findings that require us to throw out the data from that individual site. But it could also impact the review of the study as a whole. It could not just be one site, but a group of sites. Could be information that allows us to do these other things. How does OSI's recommendation impact the review? It could be things that allow us to request or recommend a sensitivity analysis, additional inspections. We could recommend additional inspections. We could do an information request to ask the sponsor or applicant to explain to us how something showed up and what they did about it to help understand the context of whatever that issue is. Or we could request an independent third-party audit. And when I say something like that, it should make those little money hairs on the back of your neck stand up and just go, whoa, 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 because an independent third-party audit is going to cost both time and money. It could delay the approval of a product, and it could cost a tremendous amount of money. So those independent third-party audits could have a really significant impact on the review of your application, both in terms of time and the outcome, the end result. And how do you avoid a poor outcome? Well, the key there, I kind of covered in response to a 43. Absolutely respond to a 43. Engage in those conversations with the regulators, with the agency. Open, honest conversations, providing explanations, not excuses, responses rather than reactions. And in your 43 response, make sure that you cover what is factually accurate in your 43, what is a real regulatory requirement. So if you look at your protocol and you see those words like should or may versus must and shall, your 43 response is where you highlight the dirty words of clinical research. If it says may, you may do it, you may not. It's not a violation. If it says should, you should do it, but it doesn't say must, not a violation. You avoid a poor outcome by making our reviewers' lives as easy as possible by giving them that information in an easily consumable format with all of the supporting documentation that we need to be able to say, yes, that's actually true, and agree with you. So absolutely avoid that poor outcome, responding to a 43 and having those open and honest conversations with the agency. So when we talk about reimagining clinical research, we already talked about what does innovation mean? Clinical research is innovation, and new isn't always better. What matters is why we're choosing to change the way that we operate, what the risk is that we're trying to mitigate, what we expect, and how we might be able to make things just 10% better. Quality by design, I think the next evolution for me, like in my own twisted head, is the real awareness of how different clinical sites operationalize the same protocol. It's understanding the unique needs of individual clinical trial sites and really considering that as part of your design phase conversations. The next evolution is about the operational realities at the vast differences or in the vast differences that you see across trial sites. And there really is no end, right? You can't just innovate and be like, well, we did our job. This is a conversation that continues to move, to evolve. It's very fluid and dynamic. We used to say that, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but this isn't even a race. There's no end to it. You just continue to ask yourself, what might make sense? What is reasonable for us to be able to do? What risks are we trying to mitigate and how might that show up for us? I love Gallup Strength Finder. Everybody know what that is? In Strength Finder, my number one strength is futuristic. That means I look at everything with a future context. And I don't mean like tomorrow or a week from now. I mean like years down the road. I can't help it. It's a compulsion that I always look at everything with a future context. And that is both a blessing and a curse, but it allows me to know that one day we are going to have clinical research embedded in our clinical care system. One day we know that anybody would be able to view clinical research as a care option and have access to that when and where they need. That access is going to be there. I know that one day that's going to be true. I also know that one day the clinical research profession is going to be recognized as a profession, that the skill sets that you deploy day in, day out in this really complicated, fluid, dynamic, global, and highly technical industry, it's going to be something that resonates with the American public as a profession, an opportunity to be able to get involved. And I know that one day we're going to use all of the tools, the technologies, the systems, the data that we have at our disposal to their maximum utility. I know that that is true. But I also know that perspective matters and small changes can make a big difference. So what if, just what if, we took that one day and we made it that this is day one? How might it look differently if this was day one of knowing that clinical research was a care option to anybody who needed it, that they had access when and where they needed? If this was day one, how might we act as if that is our reality starting today? How might we act as if it is our reality today? If this is day one of clinical research being a profession where we act as though this is the central crux of our identity as an industry, how might we act? What would it look like if we knew that today was day one of using the tools, the technology, the data systems, all the resources that are at our disposal right now? What if this was day one of using all of that to their maximum benefit starting today? Now, if we started to use the resources at our disposal to their maximum use, and if we started to make those changes, if we started to make this day one of those small changes that then compound day after day, it's going to result in our one day becoming our everyday. And that is, I think, a really incredibly powerful message of transforming clinical research, reimagining the way that we operate as an industry, what we might be able to do as a clinical research workforce to really advance innovation in clinical research, because clinical research by itself is innovation. We are the constant, and we have the power to be able to take clinical research to the next level. I feel like that's a really powerful message, empowering us all as an industry to be able to do incredible work for the public health benefit, to be able to improve the quality of the data that is submitted in support of the marketing applications, and in protecting human research subjects who choose to participate in clinical research. Now, I've included a ton of different resources here, more than enough to keep you busy for a hot minute. And I recognize that I'm way over time here, so I will pause for questions if there are any. I'll hang around afterwards if you'd like to talk to.
Thank you, Dr. Burrow. So I think we have time for just a few questions. Anybody in the room?
Crickets.
Anyone? Oh, we have one.
Hi.
Hi.
Question about pragmatic trials and pragmatic elements. What is the FDA doing to prevent pragmatic elements being exploited by ill-intended sponsor companies?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we don't usually plan the way that we operate in order to prevent exploitation in clinical research, right? Certainly not in trial design and operational approaches and the way that we structure that type of thing. But we do know that pragmatic trials and point of care trials are a hot button issue for the agency right now. And I think you can probably expect to get some more information about that in the not too distant future.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Should we take an online question?
We have a question about FDA's willingness to accept more single-arm trials. We all know the gold standard is the randomized placebo-controlled trial, but there are many underserved patient populations in which sponsors feel it is unethical for patients to not get the active drug/biologic. How can we maximize opportunities to utilize historical or external control populations, even those that are less robust in the eyes of the agency?
You know, that's the easiest question I'm ever going to get. And the reason is that that's a conversation that you need to have with a review division, given the unique nature of whatever your patient population indication trial design is. Definitely a conversation you need to have with them.
Anyone else in the room with a question? Okay, let's take one more online question.
What do you see as the greatest stumbling block that stands in the way of true implementation of quality by design and risk-based quality management systems?
Well, I think that we fall into a pretty common pitfall of thinking that what we do to really implement quality by design is like you do it and you're done. And I think one of the key messages that you heard from me here today is that this is a really evolving conversation, and what could be the very best thing for you today to do today in quality by design might not be true a year from now. So the very best thing you can do, the stumbling block that people all too often fall into, is that idea that you just dust off what you did for your last trial and redo that again because you used quality by design for your last trial last year, and you don't rethink, do that analysis again. The stumbling block is that we feel like if we've done it in the past, we can do it in the future, and that's not always or not necessarily going to be true.
Sorry, I know we were done. I loved your quote about we can do anything, but we can't do everything. I'm sure you hear a lot people's fear of not doing everything because, is the inspector going to find that one thing that I didn't do? And are they going to accept that I accepted a risk there? So sort of how do you respond to people with that fear?
Yeah, some of the most dangerous words we can use is like, could you just? And when you're talking about an organization, like a company that's coming up with a new protocol, everybody has their hands in the pot there. Everybody wants their data. They want to add exploratory endpoints or secondary endpoints, tertiary endpoints. They want to add more because they figure if you're investing in the infrastructure to be able to design and operationalize a trial, they want to be able to get everything that they can for it, which is directly contrary to the core interests of lean trials. Quality by design, cutting out the extraneous tasks, data, information like that, and focusing on truly what matters. So the conversation always comes back to what really matters here and balancing those operational realities of how anything extra might play out in real time across the spectrum of the different trial sites. The danger is that all too often when sponsors or CROs reach out to sites to be able to talk with them about how a trial might play out for them, they talk to their favorite sites. They talk to their best sites. But the reality is that when you're talking about 100 different sites, what was true for your very best, very favorite site is probably not true for the 99% of the other sites. So you really need to be able to have those conversations with a spectrum of the different sophistication levels in your sites. But it really does come down to that idea of what really matters and what the relative risk is going to be in practice.
Great, I think we're out of time for questions. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.